Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
What's kicking, little chickens?
I don't know how to respond to that, but I would like a response from you as to why you're so festive today. If you're listening, you can't see this, but Alex is wearing an adorable, slightly feminine Christmas sweater.
I am wearing a Christmas sweater that I borrowed from my wife because I was at a meeting. Sometimes we plan this on Mondays, if you don't know, or at least have our kind of final, all right, what are we going to do? Is there going to be anything, any new headlines? And sometimes apparently we plan outfits. It's never happened before, but this week in the notes there was an outfit plan that we were all going to wear our ugly Christmas sweaters the next 2 weeks and then talk about something behind them. And so I showed up with an ugly Christmas sweater on, and my friends here, whom I love and adore, did not. So, but no turning back.
No turning back.
I've decided to wear my sweater.
You're a trooper.
Thank you.
I will say, when we started this Zoom call and you looked at each of our individual boxes to investigate what sweaters we were wearing, the look on your face of betrayal was very obvious.
I was like, is there something on there? I've got pretty good eyesight. None of those look like, I know that I think those are your friends made those sweaters, Jess and Rachel, so I don't want to call that an ugly sweater. That'd be a mean thing. So.
Oh, are you guys plug in? Do we have a sponsorship deal?
I honestly am not friends with the person. I just like the shirt. But Rachel is friends. She's a model.
No,
right? You modeled.
But I do. Yeah. She's got some good shirts. So
Jess says raising kind kids.
Kind humans.
Humans. That's it. Sorry. And then Waymaker is what I see on Rachel's.
That is who you are. In another font I see. Scripted.
I mean, at this point, go ahead, give them the plug. Who is it? Where can people, if people want cool
Mac and Binge. Mac and Binge.
Okay.
Locally based. So if you want to shop local.
Are they organic, though?
I think so.
I don't know.
Okay.
You can eat macaroni and cheese and binge on their outfits. Is that the reason behind the name, or?
No.
I think it's a brother and a sister's name. Anyways.
Okay, great. Well, they've gotten far too much free airtime.
Eric, what are you wearing? A nice black tee?
Who are you wearing, Eric?
Oh.
It's
CCC.
I'm repping the brand here. Yeah, that's it. It is a little bit boring. I don't know. I go in and out of color. Anyways. No, we're still doing this Zoom style, so thanks everyone for bearing with us, even though the audio isn't always as perfect as we'd like it to be in this scenario. We still have a good time. We still get to have fun and challenging conversations. But I am really thankful for that sweater, Alex. I just can't get over it. I'm really glad that you wore it. Maybe next week, to pay it forward, we'll all wear Christmas sweaters.
So I'd be down for that.
You guys should send my wife an apology letter, because she gets mad when I borrow this because I always stretch it out. And I thought I was borrowing it for the sake of team camaraderie, but once I stretch it out, it's stretched out. I gotta wash it and
Aaron, you are such a good sport. Always.
We're sorry.
We know what you have to put up with, so we appreciate you.
Yes. That is a very good story. You even had a story behind the sweater, so you did come very, very prepared. So we do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
How's everybody holding up? Everybody's doing good, doing well, staying healthy.
Yep.
Yeah.
A couple weeks till Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, a little... Go ahead, Alex.
I did have a traumatic experience this week. I shattered my windshield, or my windshield was shattered.
Oh, yeah.
I saw
what
that on
happened?
your story.
I left for work the other day, and I walked out early in the cold, chilly morning, and we have shelves above our cars in the garage, and the bike rack decided to fall on my car and shattered the windshield. And so I put it on Instagram, so if you follow me on Instagram, you saw it, and then I didn't really give any reason of what happened, and so I never have gotten so many DMs in my life, and so I had to just copy and paste what happened, and it was probably so boring compared to what people wanted to hear. I should have sent my Venmo name and said, if you want to help support me.
Oh gosh,
those vandals out here ruining Christmas.
Yeah, I got vandalized.
So that's not what happened, but I got a new windshield. All is well, and it didn't blow in. I thought it was going to blow in on me when I was driving the other day, because I mean, it like shattered through. Like I could see the shards on my dash, so I threw some tape on it, just in case.
Tape and pray.
Yep. So
tape and pray.
It's a man's world.
I've done that before too.
Duct tape. So everyone's world then.
With the strapless dress.
Okay. Did a bike rack fall on it?
No. But I'm just saying it applies to many things.
Oh, okay. All right. Up next, we've got some headlines for you. All right, everyone. Our first headline for today comes from the Omaha World Herald, omaha.com. This is kind of a local story, but it affects many across the country. Berkshire Hathaway won't bring shareholders to Omaha for 2021 meeting. So who all here is familiar with this meeting? It was canceled last May because of COVID, and now it looks like it'll be, or not canceled, but held virtually. So it is also going to be held virtually again this year.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing. I had no idea, and then I kind of read about it, and it's like a lot of people that actually come.
It's like 40,000 usually.
Wow, yeah.
40,000 attendees.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's bigger than just like the meeting, the whole, like I've been to the meeting actually once, like at I don't even know what it was called at that time, probably the Quest Center, whatever it is now, CHI Health Center, CenturyLink, one of the names. I went there once, but the weekend is like bigger than that, because there's like I've been more times to, there's like a cocktail hors d'oeuvre type of thing on Friday nights in Regency, actually, where I met Woody Harrelson once. So that was kind of cool.
Wow.
And by I met Woody Harrelson.
Name drop.
I said hi to him, and I think he gave me a head nod. So that's what I mean by I met Woody Harrelson. But yeah, so that's kind of a fun thing. They've got a 5K that I've run in before. So it's like a whole weekend thing. And then you get discount on furniture.
I feel like it's one of those things, if you're a local from Omaha, it's one of those times where if you don't have to go to Nebraska Furniture Mart or down to the old market, you kind of just stay home unless you want to be a part of it.
Yeah, my only connection to it was seeing all the people at Nebraska Furniture Mart wearing their badge so they can get the discount.
The badge.
Yeah. I'm all about the badge. So.
Yeah. Get a discounted refrigerator. So, I mean, I think kind of the interesting thing about this, though, is it feels like you're looking into a crystal ball a little bit, because here we are in December and they're already planning events for May that are virtual, which, I mean, it kind of beats down your spirit a little bit as you hope for things to get back to normal. With some promise of a vaccine and things like that coming around, and especially May, because you're hearing these things that winter is going to be really bad because of COVID, but you think maybe we're going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But hopefully this isn't too much of a sign of what 2021 will look like.
Yeah, I was looking
it's just crazy. It's like, sorry.
Go, Rachel. Go, Rachel. You got this.
I was just saying, it's crazy. Like, things are already getting canceled a second time around. Like, it's like, okay, I got canceled last year because of COVID, but now we're canceling a second time because of COVID. Like, that is kind of like blowing my mind that we're already getting like that long of how we've been dealing with this, and just like, man, we're almost a year into dealing with this, and that's just was never what anyone expected at all in the beginning. So
for some reason, this is one of the obviously bigger things that we do in Omaha. And so it made me think back to, like, right when you shared this article, Eric, I automatically thought back to the College World Series, because it was just like another big thing. And it's like a loss that our city has had and revenue has had. I know that there are businesses that rely on that couple weeks when people are here for the College World Series, or Berkshire Hathaway, where they're making money so that they can pay their rent, like the months of the year that are slower. And so something like this, it's like, okay, there was a decision to move that virtually, and I just automatically thought of all the businesses that are already hurting and struggling, and then how it's like now they're having to brace for another loss in a way of like what this is going to bring. And just it's hard.
Yeah, hopefully like this year, maybe, and even the reason that they've announced it so early is because no matter what, it's going to be a painful thing that happens here. But at least maybe this year we're prepared for it. Like last year, you know, you've got all those rooms probably already booked in hotels. It said usually 93% of Omaha hotel rooms are booked out that week, and last year like ended up at 24%. And so you've obviously got the wave of what happens to the hospitality industry. I know people that have worked at and were working at hotels downtown and running their events that have been furloughed and not had jobs anymore. And so it's a lot of those ripple effects. And, you know, it happened first like in May. And then we had actually the NCAA tournament that was happening last year in Omaha. The NCAA, it's like the year that everything was supposed to be in Omaha. So typically we don't host, you know, every year an NCAA tournament bid. The Final Four for volleyball was supposed to be in Omaha this fall. And so it's like all of it happened the year that Omaha was supposed to actually host everything, and the Olympic trials. It's like that happens once every 4 years, of course, the year that it happened. And so I think we took the biggest hit, hopefully, in 2020. But they'll probably try to reschedule a lot of those things. But I think those are the ripples. But at least at this point, there's maybe some more opportunity to be creative and to think outside the box, or at least prepare not to have that income for employers and hotels and all that this year. But it's just crazy because that side of town really, especially downtown, that north side has really been built up, and the city's put so much money into it to create, I think, a place for these events to land. And then it's like, oops. So
yeah, and I think about like the leaders of everything right now too are like still having to make these decisions. They're still having to think about, should we do this or should we do this? Should we be in person? Should we be virtual? And like, man, that is exhausting. I just feel for all these leaders. And like, even, you know, at CCC, we had to make the decision like, I don't know, 2 months ago that we were going to do Christmas Eve services online. And that's not really a decision you want to make necessarily. You want to be in person. You want to do what you've always done. And to look ahead and be like, well, we might still be in the same situation. So we want to do what we can, you know, to have the best possible experience. And so I just feel for leaders who it's like, man, we have to give up this really awesome in-person thing, but they're probably just trying to do the best that they can to keep everyone safe and provide something that's still, you know, good for people. So it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. You look at something like even you mentioning our Christmas services. We do multiples of those most years with lots of people filling up the room, and it's just we're thankful for our leadership to have that foresight to go, this probably isn't going to work, because even we aren't even as restricted as some states, but we still wouldn't be able to. We'd have to have like 30, 40 services,
20,
just to get everybody through the doors.
Right.
So it's going to be different, but yeah, things can, we can work together and get through this and still have a great Christmas service.
Yes, we can.
And not only that, a great shareholders meeting virtually. Thank you, Yahoo. According to this article, Yahoo streaming, which I didn't know Yahoo was still in the game that much. So that's interesting to see their name. Game. Yeah,
they're winning.
All right, our next headline comes from CNN. It says House passes bill decriminalizing marijuana at a federal level. So many states at this point have, I mean, even in this election, you saw more states jump on board with legalizing marijuana for medicinal uses. And you've seen this kind of, I guess, hand-wringing about the federal government, especially when you start to see quote unquote legitimate dispensaries pop up and things like that. How do they skirt the federal regulations, things like that? You're running something that at a local level is legal, but illegal on a federal level. So Nebraska, did Nebraska have anything with marijuana in the election this year? I don't think so.
Nope.
No.
Just gambling.
Gambling.
Just gambling this year.
Lots of gambling.
I would not be surprised if it is going to be on our next set of ballots, because there's been people asking for, walking around with petitions since the summer,
all over the place, yeah.
So I think it's coming.
I think the interesting thing to me about this article is just the fact that this is they're decriminalizing it, which then I would ask the question, what about all the people who are in prison right now on possession rap? Wouldn't it be fair to release them? And it sounds like from this article, part of this is the MORE Act, which could, would remove marijuana from the Controlled Substance Act and eliminate criminal penalties, which sounds like that could be retroactive and go back, and potentially we could see people being released from prison. Because I think it's a thing that we've heard a lot about, even in the year of racial reconciliation, where, it's affected the Black community very strongly because, they'll get put in prison at a way higher rate than white people for marijuana possession. You'll see that happen a lot. And it's kind of, so you hope that you start to see this kind of be redeemed, the system, in whatever way it can. It is something that has torn families apart, and whether, wherever you stand on, should I partake or not, I think you can still separate that a little bit from what's happening here.
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up, obviously, and I've said it a bunch of times, really conservative. And so I think for me, one of the issues that's probably, and I don't have my mind fully made up because I haven't studied it a ton, but one of the issues that I definitely was that is really bad. You grow up, doing, taking the DARE challenge and doing all that kind of stuff. You hear about marijuana as a gateway drug and all that kind of stuff. But the older I get and the more, I see alcohol and even tobacco, and then you weigh the pros and cons and which one is actually killing people and all of that kind of stuff. The more, at least as I get older, aware and probably less demonizing am I towards marijuana, the more I know, obviously, people that endorse it, that, smoke weed, that endorse CBD oils and all of those kind of things. And so, that are good people, and I see it doing less damage when we're talking about just what's happening when someone ingests it, not talking about the ripples of the legal side of it, than I have seen it do, with alcohol in the lives of people. And so, for me, it's one of those things that I'm willing to take a second look at. If it hasn't come across, a Nebraska ballot, which is probably why I haven't, nowhere where I'm able to vote and things like that have I had to put in as much time as obviously Colorado and some of those kind of things. And I know Nebraska has one of the, strictest, we're one of the most conservative states when it comes to all of this, but we're flanked with some states that are a little bit more open to this, and we have got the I-80 corridor running right through the middle of our state, and so there's a lot of drugs outside of weed that happen. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think I'm gonna have to do a lot more thinking about, obviously, and praying about, and just consulting scripture and having dialogue like this over the next couple of years, I anticipate.
Mm-hmm. No one else have any?
I think that I agree with a lot of what you just said, Alex. I think that could probably be done there. I just feel like, I mean, especially like working as a counselor, I lead an addictions group. I do think that there is some validity to marijuana being a gateway drug. And because of that, and because of like, we all know that, like Alex, you even knew that terminology, there's a lot of us that wouldn't take a second look at it, look at the people that are, I mean, I have friends that are like, this is illegal and this could be really helpful for me in my disease. And this is being recommended to me. But I mean, there's a lot of taboos around this. And so to me, it's like the more that's going to come out, and it's going to force us to take a look at it, and just instead of like pushing it aside or, you know, having those subjects where it's like, oh no, like this is not, we're not even going there. I think it will help us to be better educated and better leaders, like because of it, when we know what we're talking about and kind of what we're working with. So at the same time though, like working with people with addictions, it's like, yeah, I mean, marijuana is kind of a lot of times like the first step, but what's also reckless is, you know, abusing alcohol. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's tough. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think there's going to be many more uncomfortable conversations to come.
Yeah. We'll see in a couple years if it makes it on the midterm election ballot.
Well, I think there's just so many things that we don't like to talk about that are controlled substances that are actually probably bigger gateways than we know, you know. So obviously people that get in pain situations with surgeries and kind of stuff like that slip up into those kind of conversations. But caffeine is one of those that's a huge gateway. It's literally a drug, and it does, you know, there are people, probably most of our nation, that are addicted to caffeine and literally can't function. You know, we joke about it. You know, we got like this branding of like caffeine and Jesus, give me, you know, like they're both almost equal. And we, especially I think in the Christian world, joke about our addiction to caffeine and our need for it, and have so normalized it that I don't know, most of us even understand the effects that that's doing to our body. But because it's legal, you know, we don't even think twice about it. And so my guess is that this, you know, marijuana becomes that next, you know, thing for a lot of people, that yes, it might be a controlled substance, but we get into those types of conversations. And so
I think that's a good point, Alex. And that's kind of what has kind of come up in my mind as this is happening. It's like, just because it is legal, does that mean you should do it, or you should partake in it, or you know, I think that that's going to be more and more of the questions that Christians are going to have to think through. It's like, well, now this is legal, so can I do it? Should I do it? And you're going to have to take more of an initiative to make your own decisions on things, instead of just allowing the government to kind of decide those things for you. And so I think it's an interesting thing to start thinking about, just, you know, just with this one, but I'm sure there'll be more even after this.
Yeah. It is complicated, that's for sure. And it's going to get messy. I can't help but think, you know, growing up, like tobacco and alcohol, like that was, I mean, some of the worst stuff you could possibly ever get involved with as a Christian. Like that would not be acceptable. I think you've seen probably a healthy move in some ways to people preaching more moderation, and I think that's good. I think that we've made you start to put things on a pedestal and almost stigmatize them in a way that's unhealthy. But yeah, it does. I think a lot of people have probably already made up their minds about marijuana, just as they have about tobacco and alcohol. And those things are substances that will get, you know, wrapped up in the same category. But to your point, Alex, yeah, you look at prescription drug abuse, caffeine addiction, addiction to sugar. I think sugar is something that we just, as humans, especially in America with the obesity epidemic and heart disease, it's obvious that there is an addiction problem there. So I mean, addiction takes many forms, and it's sometimes very easy for us to cherry pick the ones that we want to make an example of. But I think it's best for us to kind of look in the mirror and analyze what we're struggling with ourselves before we, judge what someone else's vices might be. All right. I think that wraps it up for headlines. Up next, we're going to be talking about facing grief during the holidays.
I'll be home for Christmas.
Grief takes many forms in our lives. It's not always the passing of loved ones. It can be potentially having to spend Christmas alone because of a pandemic, or other feelings and emotions that get stirred up around the holidays. That just, sometimes I think it's just a catalyst for those feelings that we have kind of repressed away. That's what we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this episode. So I know, Jess, grief is definitely something that it's weird to say you're passionate about it, but I think talking about the subject, I believe that would be accurate, that you're passionate about helping people walk through their grief and talk about their grief.
Yeah, I just, even like when whoever brought up the subject of having this conversation, it just made me think back to March when the pandemic started. And I know we keep bringing that up, but it's what we're dealing with right now.
Right.
It's changing a lot. It's changed Thanksgiving. It's going to change Christmas for a lot of us. And at that time, I was working with a couple different people that were in going through some grief counseling with me. And man, I just started thinking during that time, grief is a loss of something, or it can be someone, but it's so complex, it goes so deep, and it looks so different for each of us. And I have just seen so many people not giving legitimacy to their feelings and realizing like, hey, you're grieving something. And just because maybe somebody else doesn't think that you being sad over not being able to go on a trip or see your friends or be with your family, just because they're comparing it to a death or something else that's in their life, it doesn't mean that what you're feeling and how you are experiencing it isn't legitimate and it isn't valid, because it is. And I don't know, I'm not trying to go off, Eric, but there's just so many times where we can stuff those feelings, and I've seen people stuff that and not deal with it and not realize like, hey, I'm valid, and like this is something that means something to me, and I need to address this. And it turns into stuffing it, and it masks, and it comes out in different ways where it's like we're dealing with anxiety, now we're dealing with depression, now I'm thinking thoughts of like people don't care about me, because we haven't stopped to look at like the feelings that we're feeling. And that's hard to do. But yeah, it's just something that I've really been thinking about this year, really been processing, like with that, how Jesus fits into all this. And so it's a lot. What do you guys think?
I think for Christians, we sometimes are the worst at dealing with the subject of grief. I know we've talked about this in some pretty heavy ways before with a couple moms that lost their kids. And I think a lot of times, like we know funerals and we get all of that kind of stuff, but a lot of times I think we feel like we have to power up, like because we're people, and Scripture talks about we don't grieve like those who don't have hope, but it still addresses us grieving, and so there's a grief that God has given us that I think actually pulls us to Him, and it's a gift. Like we even see in Jesus's life, he has a friend named Lazarus that dies, and the shortest passage in all of Scriptures in John 11 that talks about Jesus weeping. And so we even see Jesus weeping and Jesus grieving over and if anybody knows where Lazarus was going to go and that he would meet him again one day, it was Jesus. Jesus knew this was his friend, and one day he'd be with him in paradise. But even on the face of this earth, we find Jesus pausing and considering loss, and it breaking him and him weeping. And so I think sometimes we forget that even like our Savior, that who is perfect, took moments in his life to grieve. And so sometimes we can learn from Jesus in those moments of not like just powering through and just, no, it's okay. Like I have enough faith. I'm strong enough. And I think that, Jesus wasn't like, no, it's Lazarus. I'm not going to cry. Mary, don't cry. Your brother died. It's good. He's in a better place. And though those are truths, I think we have to step back and realize that Jesus taught us to grieve. It's a part of what it means to be human. And so I think that's as you were talking about, just as Christians, how we grieve. I think that's one thing we have to remember as well. There's hope, but there is real reason to weep and to mourn and to be sad over the losses we have in our life.
And I think we can apply that verse, Jesus wept, to our own life. As I'm feeling this way, like I feel so alone, or I feel so hopeless, and Jesus sees you and he sees where you're at. He knows where the glory that's to come and the hope that he's going to give you and the amazing things that are going to come in your life after the place that you're at. But he chooses to meet us in those moments, and he feels those feelings with us. Like he met Mary and Martha on the road, and he knew, like you said, what the glory that was to come and the happiness that was to come, but he still meets us in those moments. And I think that to me is very comforting.
Yeah. And I think I this is something I've grown in the past couple of years, because I think when you don't grieve, it's easier sometimes. You're just like, I just want to push past this, and I don't want to, deal with this, and God's got it, so I don't have to really think about it. And I don't think you allow God to come in and comfort you and be the God that he is to you. And I feel like the times when I've actually allowed myself to grieve things and really lament and be sad about things and bring those to God, those are the times when I've grown closer to God and learned more about who he is and what he has for me. And I think it grows your relationship with him too, if you allow yourself to feel those feelings and bring those things to God instead of just kind of pushing past them, kind of like what you're saying, Alex, of just pushing past and being, I have enough faith, I have enough, as a Christian, I don't need to grieve. Like, I think that doesn't allow God to come in and be strong and in your weakness and show you who he is.
Yeah. So we mentioned a little bit about kind of a Christmas is a part in a pandemic, whatever that looks like, whether it's just immediate family that's going to be together this year. There probably will be a lot less large groups of family getting together. That I think that's something that people will grieve. There's so many emotions that are tied to getting together with family. But let's maybe run through some other ways that grief makes itself present in our lives that maybe we don't always think about. One interesting thing that I think, Rachel, you brought this up, and I think it's definitely someone who, how long have you been married? You've been married how many years?
Almost 3 years.
3 years.
Almost
okay.
3. Yeah.
So you brought up the idea of trying to split that time between families with your spouse, because you're trying to, and I think when you have family that lives across the country, it makes it much more difficult. And I think early on in a marriage, like trying to balance that out can be pretty tricky sometimes. And it's not always, I think, as you and your spouse deal with it, sometimes you can pretty much be okay with it, but you're dealing with the grief of your parents who are like, well, I want you here for this day, and you're trying to almost kind of placate them in a way, or at least the best way that you can.
Yeah. And I think also, like, in your first year of marriage, that is the weirdest year, because it's supposed to be so happy and so much happening and so much joy of like, oh, we're married, we get to have all these new experiences, but you don't realize all the things that you're losing, like all of the things that are being kind of not taken away from you, but yeah, like we have to split our holidays now, and we are a family unit, and so a lot of the things that maybe if my dad used to help me with something, I need to go to my husband now instead of my dad, and that's kind of like losing that relationship with your dad. I don't know, there's just so many things when you get married that and I think you don't want to grieve, because you're like, but this is supposed to be, I'm supposed to be happy, I'm supposed to be loving marriage, and I just think skip over grieving all of the things that you're losing and that are changing. And it's a weird balance of being happy and having all this joy, and then also grieving a lot of things, especially during the holidays. That is like really hard, trying to split that time, and not getting to be with your family on a day that you've been with them your whole life. So it's very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when even hearing you talk about that, I think our culture, especially in America, is such a pick yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, that even to hear someone talk about that from a grieving perspective, or to apply that terminology to something in this scenario, people might think, well, that's not really grieving, that's just growing up, right? Like that's just you just need to mature, and that takes time. And you know, I think that does probably discredit the things that you're going through and the feelings you're going through. And I think sometimes even just talking to the people in your life that's affecting directly can make such a big difference in that process, you know, just to be like, hey mom, hey dad, you know, this is weird, but I hope that you can, you know, respect my choice. And now we're our own family unit, and we're going to have to make decisions that might cut you out sometimes. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that we grieve in our lives are different types of expectations that are unmet. I think whether that, I mean, it can be something as dramatic as, you know, a couple who is wanting to have children and they can't, or they have a disagreement about whether you know, maybe one wants children, one doesn't. To stuff that maybe in some eyes aren't as, you know, important, but it could be anything. It could be the college you're going to. It could be, you know, whatever, you know, insert whatever here. But those unmet expectations can be difficult to get through to. What are some, I mean, does anyone have any examples of those that they'd want to go over?
I think probably the biggest one that just popped into my mind when you said that was all the weddings that, you know, there's this expectation of having your wedding and being a bride and all your friends being there. And yeah, lots of people got married, but it looked a lot different, and those expectations had to change. And so in that, it's like there's that mix of happy that it happened and you're married and you had a great celebration, but then it's like, you know, the people that couldn't be there and everything involved with that.
Yeah, I think too, like there can be guilt and grief. Like I've had a lot of moments over the last, you know, couple of years where, you know, I've talked about our youngest, you know, not being deaf, and you having cochlear implants was just a miracle that she can hear. But there's a lot of just small moments I find myself grieving, you know, like she can't just go down a slide because of static electricity and things like that. So things that, you know, I've done with my other 3 kids that were just a blast and they were fun, or jumping in a trampoline, or all of those small moments that like you're just used to doing. Or even right now in the car, she just can't wear her, you know, devices and stuff like that. And so even like having small conversations with her, and there's times where I think Satan or the enemy wants to come in and like say, well, it could be worse, you know, there's people like we had Carly on here who had a baby due the same day as Hannah, and they lost theirs and we have ours. And there's times where I'm like, well, I shouldn't grieve because I still have this. And I think that's one of the lies Satan has, is to try to, you know, get us to just not grieve. Yeah, perspective is good, and it's wise to have good perspective, but it's okay to like grieve over an expectation that I thought I would have of just having a kid and what those moments would be like, and the pictures of those moments that I have and I've had with my other kids, and just grieving that I don't get to have that same moment with Hannah. And so that's one of those things that, and I'm sure there's going to be waves of that as we continue to grow and cherish her. And though we're grateful and there is great perspective, I've had to learn, and I think my wife has taught me in this, because I am the person that tries to like, it's okay, you know, like we're better off than this. At least this could be worse. And God's had to like tap me on the shoulder a few times when I've just kind of pushed Aaron to be like, it's okay. Like, just count your blessings. well, yes, do that, but also like it's okay to just sit and pause and remember and to grieve over these lost moments, these pictures that we thought were going to be there that aren't there. And it doesn't mean we're angry at God or we're mad at him, but it's okay. I'm learning that along the way. And God's used, her life in my life in so many ways to learn to grieve better, to learn to grieve moments that maybe to other people are silly. But in those moments, I'm actually meeting God in powerful ways that if I would when I choose not to grieve, I'm not giving God an opportunity to meet me in those moments in his goodness and his faithfulness. And so for us, that's been a part of the journey. And for me, especially, of learning to grieve, not just those monumental moments, but just the mundane moments that I expected to happen in life.
Yeah, and I think that can come from the other end of someone who maybe isn't grieving, but interacting with someone who is grieving, kind of like you were saying, Alex, of just like with weddings, like you were talking about this year. I have so many friends who had to just have 5 to 10 people at their weddings, and just how hard that would be. I can't even imagine. But I think it's easy for us to kind of want to help them by saying, well, at least you get to get married, or at least you have your family there, or it's all about being married and together anyways, and you just want to say these things because I think it makes you feel better and you think it makes them feel better, but the reality is that doesn't change what happened, and that doesn't change how they feel and the sadness that they feel and the hurt of like, I don't get to have the celebration that I want to have. And so I think coming from the other side of things, where maybe someone in your life is grieving, and trying to be a little more just sit and grieve with them. I mean, that it can be hard and weird and uncomfortable, but that really could be the thing that just will help them in that time, instead of just kind of helping them be like, well, it's okay, you're fine, that's easier to do.
Yeah.
And I think being aware of, like, we're talking about expectations, the expectations that we might have about grief, or we might have about someone else's grief, of, hey, they should be over this by now. Or, if they're just strong, if they just decided to power through it, like, they would be better. It's like, you never know when someone could be triggered by a loss, or someone could be really, going through something really difficult. And so I think being aware of the fact that, like, grief doesn't have a timetable. There are people that, go through big and little things, but can be triggered by, a memory or a thought, or it's just like, you don't realize it's going to pop up. Like Alex said, like a slide at a park. Like, you wouldn't expect that. I'm sure that, Alex, you don't expect that when you saw it, but it's just like that comes up, and it's like, okay, I can stuff that, or I can look at this head on and I can talk to God about that, or I can wrestle through that. And then it's leads to, that deeper relationship of, sharing that grief with somebody, and not being the person that says, like, okay, well, yeah, it's fine. But saying, like, man, that's hard. Like, how can I help you? Like, how can I pray for you in this? Like, there's a choice that we have in that too. Depending on how close we are with that person, but
yeah, I think that's there are different things that'll trigger memories. And like for me, I know losing my mom in 2016, I'm 4 years removed now, but there are still things like I cannot listen to the Alabama Christmas album. I love that album so much because I would listen to that with my mom growing up, but if I hear a song from that thing, it'll destroy me. I'll be done. But I think the thing about grief is that it comes in irrational waves. Like, it's not something that you have control over, and it's not something that you can just say, okay, well, I'm done grieving, I'm going to move past it. It's weird. I know that first year after losing my mom, it would come, it was almost like you'd almost have like these like nightmares that you wouldn't wake up from, even though it's happening. You're just in the middle of the day, you're awake, and you just start to have this overwhelming dread of, okay, I've lost not only my mom, I've lost this encyclopedia of knowledge that I would just go to and I would take for granted at any time of the day. And I could just call or text her. I lost all that too. I lost this, I lost that. And so you just have this dread that would just kind of overwhelm you because you realize that it's not going away. That loss is gone. It's forever erased. It's been at least on this earth, and I think when you start to cope with that stuff, it makes it more and more difficult. Well, I mean, I do think that this saying time heals is an honest thing, but it is not something that someone wants to hear in that moment when they are grieving. It is not something that's going to make anybody feel any better, because time takes time and it's so far away that you're not, you can't even rationalize that in your brain, even though it is true at that, 4 years removed. Now I can look back and go, yes, time has healed some of those wounds. And that is a true statement, but I wouldn't have wanted to hear that 4 years ago. That wouldn't have made a difference,
Yeah.
And I think we're going to dive in a little more into loss of loved ones and things like that. But one thing that's very particular to me, it's been a crazy year for conspiracy theories. It's been a crazy year for political divide, and I feel like I'm coining the term conspiracy casualties, and I feel like, I know personally that's what I've been grieving a lot this year. Is I feel like I have lost extended family to these rabbit holes of conspiracy and political division, to where, like, even at this point, an olive branch doesn't work, because it's like if you don't believe what they believe, then you're the enemy, and so that's one thing. And it's not obviously not the same as losing someone, but it kind of feels that way at times, because you realize that it's going to take time for that relationship to mend, and it takes both people to do that, right? I know that the onus is on me as equally as it is on them. I can't just wait for someone to come crawling back to me, like when you're in an argument or something like that, you kind of hope for. But that's not going to happen. I'm going to probably be the one that's going to have to extend that olive branch. But again, time becomes the factor in that, as you deal with people and personalities, and I think it's heartbreaking, because there are certain aspects of it when someone has been deceived by something, like anything in the world, it's so hard to reach out to them and to make that connection to kind of mend those wounds, because that deception can run far deeper than we realize sometimes. And it's kind of like sucking the venom out from a snake bite or something like that. How do you go about it? What's the process? And sometimes you just feel lost.
Yeah, I was sitting with a couple that I married earlier this year the other day, and they were talking about a lot of that specific stuff. They're like, first, like at our wedding, that all happened, and then like both of their parents are on two totally different political kind of spectrums, as far as all of the medical stuff, all of the vote stuff, and like there was literal conversations around, like, if you don't vote this way, if you decide to wear masks everywhere, if you do all of this, then I can't believe you. And like it's like they're like, I don't really want to cut the relationship off, but they're throwing around huge weighty words, like you're ignorant or you're stupid or I didn't raise you like that, and things like that. I think people just aren't considering, because we're just getting so passionate about a political figure that we've hitched ourselves to, or just the moments, or like some of those conspiracies that you've been talking about, where people are willing. And I think that's where the painful stuff is like, there's not, I have siblings and people I love that do things I would never do, I don't agree with, that I think they've been deceived in really big ways, and it grieves me. But I just can't imagine like one of those getting to the level where I'm ready to cut off a relationship, over it. But I've seen that happen in the lives of so many people, and it's just painful that people are like, I'm gonna throw away all of this history and all of this time for like our relationship, because of my relationship with a political party. And really, I think a lot of it has come down to that, whether it's masks or, vaccinations or all of that kind of stuff. It's really around ideology. And part of me gets, because these are people, when two people are really passionate about an idea or a thought, and you both think that you're both deceived, things just get really messy there. And so for me, I've had to take a lot of inventory in my own life of I am far more deceived than I realize I am. Like there's a saying that one of my professors used to always say, that we are all heretics. Every pastor needs to realize we're all really good heretics. We just we don't see our own heresy. That's just a part of who we are. And so in me realizing some of those things, I've come to more revelation overseeing some of those things, but also what's worth it. Like, I think a lot of people have had to ask themselves, like, what hills am I willing to die on for losing a relationship? And unfortunately, I've just seen the wake of that happen. And it's more painful too when it's public, I think, as well. Like some of those conversations I've had that are private, but then I've seen, like, Eric, like I've seen conversations where I'm like, okay, they have the same last name, so I'm guessing they're family. And I'm just like, I feel for just like, man, the disgusting discord that, like, I've seen people throw, and venom I've seen people throw at you for some of the, and just continue to come back. And I'm like, I wish I didn't have to see that, if that's what's going out for all of us to see. Like, I wonder, where those hearts are at. And so, and I've seen not just you, not just your family, but I've seen that all over the place. I'm like, why are we having that conversation here? So
yeah, it's been pretty widespread, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I think also for Christians, this year has been another, I feel like, hard, like, grieving the prioritization of, like, other things over Jesus. Like, I just think there's so many things that have come up in 2020 that it's easy for people to latch onto and prioritize that over Jesus. And, like, I mean, politics, all that kind of stuff that is causing relationships to break apart. And I think that is another thing that's kind of grieving my own heart. And it's not non-believers, it's Christians. That's what's hard. It's people who love God and follow Jesus that are putting other things above Jesus and putting other ideas and they're chasing after other things. And I'm grieving that this year. That's just really sad. I mean, and there's just so much division in the church, and that could be another thing that people might be grieving this year. And just, if you're in a church and you are seeing that division and you're confused, you don't understand why. I'm at a church with people who believe in God, and they are fighting over politics or over these little things. And I thought we were supposed to love each other and care about each other and follow Jesus. And I'm grieving that, because that is so sad. That's so sad to me. So yeah, that's just a weird thing to think about grieving. But yeah, when you really think about this year, there's a lot that people
and I
grieving.
think to your point, the scary thing about that for me is this year more than any, we have seen politics become synonymous with your faith. And I think we have seen that. And I mean, we want to talk about spiritual warfare. I think that's a telltale sign of it, where we're seeing people being manipulated to believe that if you don't believe the way they do politically, then you don't believe the way they do about Jesus. And and that's the scariest thing that I can think of, because it has caused such a division more than ever. And then when you have rhetoric from political leaders who are spinning these tales to deceive people into believing that this is like a righteous crusade almost, then it just makes it makes it worse. It makes it more volatile, and then it makes political conversations seem much more like life and death to everyone, because now we have roped in our faith into it, which it does and should mean more than politics to us. But once they become synonymous, there's no way to sever the connection, and now you have to choose a side, and if you choose the wrong side, you're excommunicated.
A couple weeks ago, I think it was 2 episodes ago, we talked about what we were thankful for in 2020. And I think one of the things we talked about on that episode was we were thankful for like the hard conversations that we could have with people, like the issues that we got to address and speak about. But even us, like a couple weeks later, just there are so 2 sides to that of, there is grief also, like in maybe somebody feeling and having more boldness to share feelings or thoughts. Like there's a grief to that side too. And obviously the way that that's communicated has a lot to do with it. But I'm just thinking that of like, man, something that we can also be thankful for that could be used for something really good is also something that can be used to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think like, do our boundaries need to be like for ourselves? Like what's good for us in these situations? It's like a lot of the conversations we have are, people that are maybe subjected to parents saying something or an expectation put on them. But it's like there's some control that you can take of like, what's my boundary? And we can't control everything.
Yeah.
But it's like, where can I go? Where am I willing to go with that? And then what do I need?
Yeah.
Like what are my coping mechanisms? Like when somebody hurts me, like, do I need to take a step back? And then how do I respond? Or when my parents say this to me and I'm married, but they're still talking to me, maybe like I'm 16 living in their house, like what's my boundary? How do I communicate that? And figuring that out. That's hard. This is hard stuff we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think these are all things, these, to try to keep it on topic with grief during the holidays. In some ways I was thinking if family gatherings are much smaller, then maybe you won't have to deal with some of those hard conversations over Christmas. But it is one of those things that as you get together with family and these divisions have been made, and it's so much more deep rooted, right? Especially when you're talking about family, there's hidden jealousies in there. There's old feuds from years ago. There's hurt that you don't even know about that's festering in other siblings or parents or whatever, aunts and uncles, cousins. And so, you get together with the family, and sometimes that stuff, it just, no one wants to talk about it. Everybody puts on their smile. And I think, you do have a legitimate good time a lot of times, but there is still this kind of undercurrent of emotion that can be around there during the holidays. Let's talk a little bit though about how God can use grief to better us, to strengthen us, to form. I think he uses it to form our personalities, our characteristics, the way that we carry out the Great Commission. There's a lot of ways that I think God uses grief, and you see it in the Bible over and over and over. It's a very repetitive theme there. But what are some observations you have from that? Not all at once, please.
I was just going to say, I think just in general, just a deeper reliance on just him. And I know it's so cliche to be like, God is all you need, Jesus is all you need. But I just feel like when you're in those moments, you really do have to look at that and be like, is he all I need? Is he the thing that sustains me and that I can just put all my hope in, even when these things aren't happening for me? Am I able to trust in him, rely on him? So just, like a deeper reliance on him and his timing sometimes for those things that maybe are expectations or things that aren't happening the way that you wanted them to happen. Just trusting in his timing and that his plan is perfect and sovereign. And even if you can't see it, you have to trust that he has a plan so just deeper reliance on him.
I think personally for me, I don't think that any of us here can say there's not a grief that we've had to go through and experience. And for me, one of the things that I have grieved for a long time, I'm 36. now everyone knows how old I am. But I've grieved often, and it's come up often that I did not grow up in a healthy family environment. And there's a lot of things that I've had to grieve, a lot of cycles that I've had to break because of that. And I mean, we get to a point in our grief where it's like, God can't use me, and he can't, what can he do with this? But then there's that he weeps with us, and he meets us in those moments, and there's such a faithfulness and a hand that we can feel like when he's with us. And so for me, that grief turned into, I care about people, and I care about people feeling an identity and helping them process through that. And so it's like a lot of times, like, you see wounded healers, as Wendell Nelson would call them, or I mean, it's a Christian phrase that we use, but it's true. I mean, there's a lot of us here. I mean, even as leaders, you can hear someone on stage and you're like, man, they've been to a place to be able to share from the depths that they are now. And I think God can redeem so much, but he can also use that to lift somebody up out of a place where it's like, hey, I've been there, and to give hope. There's just so much wrapped up in that for me.
That's really good. Yeah.
I think one of the fundamental things I've learned about just grief and the arc of scripture and how God uses it is, I think grief overall at its most basic level is a gift from God. Like, I think it's one of those things that when we feel grief, when we feel this isn't how things are supposed to be, like this, it's this reminder that yes, this isn't how things are supposed to be, that God created this planet and this world with great expectation and with great purpose. And when things fall apart, when people die, when relationships die, when we're hurt, when people stab us in the back, when we're sinful and when we're sinned against, and we have those moments of grief that are usually like, this isn't fair, this isn't how things should be, it's because that's true. It reminds us of, yes, this isn't how things are supposed to be, that God did create this to be better, and we are living in the wake of sin and the ripples of sin in our every single day life, that the pains that we feel in our lives, that the pains of childbirth, that the pains of our identities not feeling like they are wrapped up in the same way that God wants us to see ourselves. Every time we live in that kind of grief or lament, which we see a ton of in scripture, it's reminders to us of, yes, this isn't the way things are supposed to be. And then that's when our eyes can begin to be fixed on the one who does create things, the one who is going to redeem and restore things the way that they were supposed to be. So we're living in the middle of mess, and grief is a reminder that God did create something for a purpose, and that this isn't how things should be. And so I think that's why when we do take time to sit with our grief, when we do take time to identify our grief, that we actually can begin to see the goodness and hope on the other side of grief. But when we just dismiss it, it actually, I think, causes us to dismiss God and dismiss his goodness and dismiss his plans, and then try to power up again, like I said earlier, and solve it ourselves. And so I think grief is a grace that God has given us to tangibly remember that we were created as pilgrims for a whole different world. So
another process of grieving is sharing your grief. I think one, it's a process that maybe gets overlooked a lot, because I know even my own personality is kind of leads me astray there, where I feel like, well, if I talk about my grief with someone, they're just going to think I'm trying to get sympathy, and they're just going to think, oh, I'm having a pity party and I just need attention. And so a lot of times I hold that stuff in, because I don't want people to have that perception of, oh, he just needs to be the center of attention, he's just needy. this, and it's just about him. And so, okay, that's probably what they're thinking. That's what I'll tell myself. So that's a huge roadblock for me mentally in sharing my grief with others. But I do think that's part of the grieving process. That's probably, at least in my life, is the most overlooked. And I don't know about others, but I think that it also may be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's vulnerability.
Oh.
Go, Rachel. Go.
I was just gonna say I haven't dealt with like a death in a close death in my family or a friend or anything like that yet. And so the things that I would be grieving, I feel like seem small in comparison to that. And like Jess, you were saying earlier, people think grief is related to losing a loved one or death. And so I think for that, in that situation, it's hard for me to even bring up the things that I might be grieving to people, because I think, they probably are like, why are you upset about that? Like, that's not a big deal. Like, what you're grieving is not a big deal. Like, you're fine. You can, get on with things. And so I think sometimes people don't want to share because they feel like what they're grieving is too small. And kind of what, like Alex was saying earlier, of just, well, I'm fine. Like, other people are worse off. Other people have it worse. I am, blessed in all these other things. And so, I don't need to be upset or sad about this. And I think that keeps people from sharing things with others. But I feel like also the times when I have shared those things with people, those relationships have grown deeper. And even sometimes people will respond in a way of saying, oh, really? Like, you struggle with that too? Like, I actually am struggling with the same thing right now, and I didn't know anybody else was feeling that way. And that kind of opens up those relationships in a different way, even for the other people that you're talking to.
Yeah, it's good. I think we said yeah at the same time. Good job. I do think
Jinx.
Vulnerability is difficult, especially I think the more you've been vulnerable and been burnt by people, or unfortunately we live in a place where people will use our vulnerabilities or our own pains or things like that as leverage in our lives sometimes to get up or to know how we can hurt one another, or how we can take jabs at one another. And so that's difficult. And the more and more you have that trust erode from people that you love, it becomes harder and harder to be vulnerable and open up. Just growing up in a house where we had a ton of foster kids, and they would go from one house to another, and then their vulnerabilities and all of that would become exposed. You would get people that are super calloused, and then they act out, and it's not because they want to, it's because every time they've opened up, people have just thrown salt into the wounds, and people have learned to use that against them. And that's why I do think empathy and trust and all of those things are huge. And then we live in a world now where everything can be exposed pretty easily. And so we live, I think, even more like clammy and even more like wanting to keep everything to ourselves, because you never know when the wrong person, even sharing in the right, environment, might come back around and bite you. And so I think even living in a world where everybody's listening and everyone's got a cell phone and it feels like privacy is a big deal, even sharing it in safe places sometimes feels unsafe, because you've heard about people who thought they were sharing something in a safe place, and 20 years later it comes up and wrecks their life. And so I think that even is another layer on top of the ability to feel vulnerable and stuff. So
I think our culture gives us an idea when we say share what that looks like today. And so when I meet with somebody that's grieving, one of the first things that I ask in the process is like, who are your people? Who's in the arena with you? And maybe it's two people, and that's who you're sharing with. Like, there's an expectation. We see people in social media that share their grief, and it feels like you're walking with them daily, because that's like therapeutic for them to share in that way. But maybe for somebody else, like sharing is taking a picture of things that remind us of that person. And I think processing through how we share that, there it falls back almost into like the expectations we were talking about before of like, oh, well, there was this big loss, but he's never shared what he's going through. And I think the promise of and the truth of Jesus's life and his words is that it's not like there's a timetable where, you know, oh, we're going to walk through something and it's going to expire. It's not like Jesus is like, okay, well, you missed your opportunity to share and that's great for you. But it's like, what does sharing look like? I mean, I work on Tuesday nights with renewal groups, and there's groups specifically for different losses and things that people are grieving. And, you know, their family members don't know. So sharing doesn't always mean tell your family. Mm-hmm. Sharing doesn't always mean like you need to talk to your best friends and you need to like, you know, have a moment at your Christmas party or your Christmas dinner of like what you're going through. And so I think like there's a pressure that we could feel with sharing too. And then an expectation of like, okay, well, I failed and I'm not processing through this because I haven't told everybody. But it's like, there's lots of different ways that we can share. But I do agree, Eric, like it's important to figure out a way to like, who do we need to talk to? Who are your people? Mm. How does that get out? Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So let's wrap things up with talking about moving past grief. It's not something, I mean, we've I think made that clear that you just get over. It's not you wake up and it's done. The process looks different for everybody. And I think it's important for us to remember not to judge the way people are grieving because it's going to look different for everybody. And I think when you haven't gone through an experience that someone else has gone, like whether it's a parent losing a child versus a child losing a parent, those grieving processes can look very, very different. And I think what we talked about, things that may seem smaller to some people, like weddings that are canceled, things like that, where someone could look at that and go, okay, well, you just need to get over it. Life happens, move on. But how can we be gracious with one another, and what are some good practices for moving past grief, but also giving time to those that need it?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts? I know for me, I think there are times where I will make snap judgments right away on something and it's usually most of the time though, that's based on my own perspective. That's based on what would I think about this? How would I react in this situation? What would I do if this happened to me? Which some ways you can't really answer that question if it's never ever happened to you, but we think we know, you know, like you hear people say, well, when I have kids, they're never going to do X, Y, Z, whatever, which are usually famous last words. But I think people react that way a lot because of their perspective and their worldview and the way they were brought up, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like I've learned over time that I need to pause and try my best to put myself in their perspective and try to understand what they're going through. Because, I mean, and then at that point, if I still don't understand, I just have to be patient. I think patience comes into play there, and you need to wait it out. And I know I dealt with friends who've lost close family members to them, and it's like you think, well, man, sometimes maybe you think, well, they're just grieving too long. This has been so many years, like it's too long. But then you start to see them make progress eventually. It just, you know, it can take time and things are different. But are there other ways that you can think that can help us help others in moving past grief?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Eric, I think you were kind of saying that you think about how you would react or how you would respond and what you would want other people to say, you know, to you. And I think one thing that's okay is just to ask people what they need or what they want. Like, we don't have to guess or try and figure it out or, you know, figure out what we should do. Like, you can literally just ask people, hey, I know that there's something that you're going through that's really hard. And like, what can I do? How can I help you grieve? And how can I be with you and for you in this time and see what they need? Because people are so different. Like you were saying, Jess, people are so different in how they grieve and what they need and what they're going to do. And so you really can't ever just have a cookie cutter way that you're going to grieve with someone. You have to like ask them and just see what they need. And that's okay. You don't have to know everything. You can ask and see where they're at and what they need and what you can do to help them. And sometimes they just don't want you to do anything, and that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think those are all great ideas. I also think depending on your relationship, and this even happened today, where there's a friend that's like, hey, I have this friend that's going through something, and how do I offer or suggest going to counseling? Because that's something that you could do too, but that's like depending on your relationship. But that's also maybe something that somebody needs to move in the next direction, or maybe get like a different perspective on something too.
Mm-hmm.
I think we often throw around like passages like 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, and you hear it read at weddings and all that kind of stuff. Love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud. There's this whole list of things, and for me, it's like literally one of the most frustrating passages in Scripture, because and it promises that love never fails, but love takes work. And so to love people really well, like you shared, Eric, it's patience. It's being patient with people. It's not keeping score. Mm-hmm. It's not self-seeking. It's all of those things. And so a lot of times we equate love to just feelings and emotions, but love, like, it grows and it takes work, and we're people that are called to love one another. And so I think a lot of times when it comes to just grief, and in order to love people really, really well, I think that's a good place to start. Am I being patient? Am I loving this person well? Am I being kind? Am I not envying? Am I not keeping score? Keeps no record of wrongs? I think a lot of times, even in grief, I want to say, well, you're in this situation because X, Y, and Z, and it's because I'm keeping record of wrongs, or you deserve it. And so those are the hardest times for me to grieve with someone, when I'm like, well, you kind of made your bed and you're laying in it. But it still doesn't mean at that point that grief isn't what is appropriate for them to be doing when they finally come to that point. And so for me, it's one of the most difficult things, is in one of the passages that makes me the most mad, because we use it like it's this fairy tale cute little thing, but it takes a lot of work to love really well and to love people really well. I mean, those of us who are married and those of us who have kids, like, we end up really feeling this, that it's not just about the emotions and keeping score and all of that kind of stuff, but we realize that loving people, whether it's our spouse or our kids, it's one of the most humbling, sanctifying journeys that we could ever be a part of, because it just forces us to wrestle with our own selfishness, our own pride. But it also, when done well, when love is on display really well, when we love one another well, it's no wonder that it changes, people's hearts. It changes people's lives. It points them to Christ, and it's just a model to point people to Jesus. Though I'm still messed up, though I suck, though I'm flawed, though I don't have it all figured out, He still loved me while I was still a sinner, while I wasn't even aware of that. And so I think that's a good reminder as well too.
And He's still loving me. That's the part that sometimes is even harder to swallow.
Yeah.
Even after I know better. That's really good. It's really good stuff. Jess, you've mentioned a couple times the grief counseling that you're involved in. Is there anything you would mind maybe just mentioning to people as a resource or anything like that? I know they can go to cccomaha.org if they're in the local Omaha area and click on ministries and the care network to find information there. Anything else pop into your mind?
A lot of churches have it. It's in different states as well, but a huge, amazing resource is a group. If you're feeling like you can share in a group is a group called Grief Share. You can go to their website, and we have 13 people that have just spent September through. They have a couple weeks left of. It's a place where other people are processing loss in practical ways. They're not very pushy. And we have another one that's going to be starting up in January. If you want me to give my email, or you can find it on the website too. All the information is under our renewal page. But it's a great resource. Doesn't cost a lot, but it's a great step in that direction of maybe grieving something that you haven't. It can be recent or years ago.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a great resource.
Awesome. That's great. All right. I think that does it for us today. We have one more episode coming next week before we take a 2-week break for the holidays. So just fair warning. So everyone is prepared for that, and they can emotionally prepare to grieve for 2 weeks when we're not in their ears.
Great time to catch up.
Alex, we'll all be wearing Christmas sweaters.
Yes.
I don't believe it. All three of you, maybe.
All right. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media at CCC Omaha, or send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We take those very seriously, and we really appreciate the feedback that we've gotten so far. So don't hesitate to do that. But until next time, we'll talk to you all then.